Hello, this is Chris Wilhelm, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, December 19th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our first article today, Trump administration aims to strip more foreign-born Americans of citizenship. An official with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services said it would prioritize those who've unlawfully obtained U.S. citizenship. By Hamed Ali-Aziz. The Trump administration plans to ramp up efforts to strip some naturalized Americans of their citizenship, according to internal guidance obtained by the New York Times, marking an aggressive new phase in President Trump's immigration crackdown. The guidance, issued on Tuesday to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services field offices, asks that they supply Office of Immigration Litigation with 100 to 200 denaturalization cases per month in the 2026 fiscal year. If the cases are successful, it would represent a massive escalation of denaturalization in the modern era, experts say. By comparison, between 2017 and this year to date, there had been just over 120 cases filed, according to the Justice Department. Under federal law, people may be denaturalized only if they committed fraud while applying for citizenship or in a few other narrow circumstances. But the Trump administration has shown a zeal for using every tool at its disposal to target legal and illegal immigrants, leading activists to warn that such a campaign could sweep up people who had made honest mistakes on their citizenship paperwork and sow fear among law-abiding Americans. The guidance comes as Mr. Trump has spent much of this year closing loopholes in the immigration system and throwing up roadblocks for people seeking to enter and stay in the country. The sweeping campaign, which has gone further than purging the country of unlawful migrants, has included blocks on asylum at the southern border, a pause on asylum applications inside the United States, and a ban on entry for travelers from predominantly African and Middle Eastern nations. Officials say their actions will make the country safer and preserve the country's values. A targeted campaign to increase the number of American immigrants stripped of their citizenship represents an escalation of an already ambitious campaign. It's no secret that U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services' war on fraud includes prioritizing those who've unlawfully obtained U.S. citizenship, especially under the previous administration, said Matthew J. Tragesser, a U.S. CIS spokesman. We will pursue denaturalization proceedings for those individuals lying or misrepresenting themselves during the naturalization process. We look forward to continuing to work with the Department of Justice to restore integrity to America's immigration system. In interviews, some former agency officials expressed concern at the scale of the case goals for denaturalization pushed by USCIS leadership. Imposing arbitrary numerical targets on denaturalization cases risks politicizing citizenship revocation, said Sarah Pierce, a former USCIS official, and requiring monthly quotas that are 10 times higher than the total annual number of denaturalizations in recent years turns a serious and rare tool into a blunt instrument and fuels unnecessary fear and uncertainty for the millions of naturalized Americans. Proponents of stricter immigration laws said it was necessary to more aggressively root out people who had been improperly granted citizenship. I don't think we're anywhere close to denaturalizing too many people, said Mark Krikorian, the head of the Center for Immigration Studies, a group that favors restrictive immigration policies. Mr. Krikorian said that the country was so far from denaturalizing enough people that such an effort would not pull in people who should not be targeted. There are about 26 million naturalized Americans in the country, according to the Census Bureau. More than 800,000 new citizens were sworn in last year, most of whom were born in Mexico, India, the Philippines, the Dominican Republic, or Vietnam, USCIS statistics show. Most people stripped of their citizenship revert to being legal permanent residents. The new guidance on Tuesday was part of a document laying out USCIS priorities for fiscal year 2026, which began in October. Listed alongside such goals as provide employee feedback opportunities and strengthen management of high-risk cases was pursue denaturalization. The Justice Department previously also said it would make denaturalization a priority this year. In a memo distributed in the summer, officials laid out their approach, saying they would target individuals in an array of categories beyond committing fraud in obtaining citizenship. Categories of eligible people include gang members, those who committed financial fraud, individuals connected to drug cartels and violent criminals, according to the department. The Civil Division shall prioritize and maximally pursue denaturalization proceedings in all cases permitted by law and supported by the evidence, the agency wrote in June. USCIS is a key player in the process of denaturalization. The agency refers cases to the Justice Department, which must go through a federal court to strip someone of their citizenship. The process can occur either through a civil or criminal proceeding. During a civil case, government lawyers must have unequivocal evidence that someone obtained citizenship illegally or hid a material fact during the process. Because the government must go through a challenging court process, denaturalization cases have been rare since the 1990s. A Bloomberg Law analysis found that denaturalization cases brought by the government since then peaked in 2018, when 90 criminal and civil cases were filed. The Supreme Court has repeatedly stated that citizenship and naturalization are too precious and fundamental to our democracy for the government to take it away on their whim. Instead of wasting resources digging through Americans' files, USCIS should do its job of processing applications as Congress mandated, said Amanda Barron, a former senior USCIS official in the Biden administration. Mr. Trump stepped up denaturalization in his first term as well. In one widely publicized case, a New Jersey man born in India, Baljinder Singh, was stripped of his citizenship after the Justice Department found that he had arrived in the country without travel documents or proof of identity and that he had used a different name. This year, the Justice Department has brought 13 denaturalization cases and won 8 of them, according to Chad Gilmartin, an agency spokesman. Mr. Gilmartin said in a social media post earlier this year that there had been over 100 cases filed to the courts during the first Trump administration, compared with 24 during the Biden administration. In 2017, the Supreme Court ruled that the government must prove not only that someone had lied during the citizenship application process, but that the lie had an impact on the underlying citizenship claim. Experts said that despite the ramp-up in referrals, the process to actually denaturalize someone would likely remain quite difficult, raising questions on whether the government will actually be able to get many cases through. Still, some had concerns about what the guidance could portend. My fear would be that, as we have seen in the arrest and removal context when DHS employees are given arbitrary targets, what happens is people who shouldn't be swept up get swept up, and that you're going to see that happening to people in this context as well, said Margie O'Haron, a senior fellow at the Brennan Center, a nonpartisan law and policy organization. That could incite fear and terror amongst naturalized citizens. As Trump puts his brand on Washington, the Kennedy Center gets a new name. The board for the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts announced that it would now be named the Trump Kennedy Center, although a formal change may have to be approved by Congress. By Sean McCreish. President Trump's takeover of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts reached its inevitable apogee on Thursday afternoon when it was announced that the center's board of trustees had voted to rename it the Trump Kennedy Center. Even though Mr. Trump had already been calling it that for months in trollish posts online, he acted shocked that his hand-picked board had thought to do this for him. "I was honored by it," he told reporters at the White House. "The board is a very distinguished board, most distinguished people in the country, and I was surprised by it. I was honored by it." Earlier that day, he had called into a meeting of the board, which is now made up almost entirely of people who are loyal to him. By law, there are a handful of members of Congress from both parties who sit on the board as well. Unusually, the meeting was taking place not at the Kennedy Center, but at the Palm Beach home of the casino magnate Steve Wynn, whose wife Andrea sits on the board. Richard Grenell, the center's Trump-appointed president, was there, and so was Lee Greenwood, who performed God Bless the USA at the meeting. Another member who was in Palm Beach for it was Sergio Gore, a longtime aide to the president who was recently nominated to be the ambassador to India. It was Mr. Gore who proposed the name change. But there was at least one person who was not down with the idea, Representative Joyce Beatty, Democrat of Ohio, who had called in to the meeting. It was such a surprise to me when they said they were going to rename it, she recounted in a phone interview. I said, "Oh my gosh," and pushed my button. But then I was muted. She added everything was cut off, and they immediately said, "Well, it's unanimous. Everybody is for it." Ms. Wynn claimed in a phone interview that she was not aware that Ms. Beatty had been muted, and that she did not know who was responsible for it. As for how the president reacted to the name change, I think he was very happy, she said. Ms. Beatty described the meeting this way. Everything was regurgitated about how awful anything with the center was, how run down it was, how everything was humiliating, and now they had come in as the great saviors of it. She added that the other members took turns praising Mr. Trump, who then pretended to be surprised when they voted to rename the joint after him. He said, "Oh, I didn't know you were all going to name it after me," she said. She was not the only one who had questions about the Kennedy Center rebrand Thursday. Many of the art institution's current and former staff members were asking each other if the name change was even legal. The Performing Arts Center is by law designated the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. It was built to be a living memorial to the slain 35th president, and it has been generally understood that the power to change the name lies with Congress. We never considered or were permitted to name any part of the building for another human being because it was the official memorial for President Kennedy, said Michael Kaiser, who was the Kennedy Center's president from 2001 to 2014. Members of the Kennedy family reacted with outrage to the name change. President Kennedy proudly stood for justice, peace, equality, dignity, diversity, and compassion for those who suffer, Carrie Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy's daughter, wrote on social media. President Trump stands in opposition to these values, and his name should not be placed alongside President Kennedy's. Joe Kennedy III, he was a grandson of Robert F. Kennedy, posted on social media, "The Kennedy Center is a living memorial to a fallen president and named for President Kennedy by federal law. It can no sooner be renamed than can someone rename the Lincoln Memorial, no matter what anyone says." One senior White House official said the administration disagreed with the legal interpretation that any name change must come from Congress. Some other people employed at the Kennedy Center were bummed by the news, but resigned to the fact that the place was basically already the Trump Center in everything but name anyhow. The rename was just the latest maneuver in the overall Trumpification of the Capitol. The East Wing, the Rose Garden, the Colonnade, the White House residence, the flagpoles, the Department of War, and the plans for the Arc de Triomphe-style arch on the other side of the Potomac. And now this. Why must this president's name be slapped atop the name of another? The memorial of Kennedy is still there, Ms. Wynn protested, and Kennedy was a great lover of the arts, which is one of the reasons it was named after him. And President Trump has shown what a great lover of the arts he is as well in involving himself. Ms. Wynn's husband, Steve, was there for the meeting in Palm Beach on Thursday. He answered my call on speakerphone. It sounded like quite the party. "All the husbands are here," he shouted over the din of the meeting. "Rob Kraft and Ike Perlmutter. We're all keeping our wives company." Mr. Wynn said that he had been friends with Mr. Trump for 43 years and that he's always had an interest in the Kennedy Center for as long as he has known him. "What I could see is the name is sort of a reflection of the men who have given it its vitality," he said. "First John Kennedy, now Donald Trump. Those two guys had more to do with keeping that thing exciting and relevant." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump moves to end gender-related care for minors, threatening hospitals that offer it. Proposed new rules would punish the hospitals by pulling all federal financing. Advocates say lawsuits will follow. By Azeen Qureshi, Amy Harmon, and Reed Abelson. The federal government on Thursday acted to put an end to gender-related care for minors across the nation, threatening to pull federal funding from any hospital that offered such treatment. The move reflects the laser-like focus on the issue by President Trump, who in his first days in office called gender treatments for minors a stain on our nation's history. The administration's action is not just a regulatory shift, but the latest signal that the federal government does not recognize even the existence of people whose gender identity does not align with their sex at birth. If finalized, the proposed new rules announced by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at a news conference Thursday morning would effectively shut down hospitals that fail to comply. Medicare and Medicaid account for nearly 45% of spending on hospital care, according to KFF, a nonprofit health policy research group. It follows other efforts by the administration to pull back from or eliminate policies that recognize gender identities beyond being born male or female. We want our hospitals returning to healing, not harming the patients entrusted in their care, or they're going to pay a very steep price. Dr. Mehmet Oz, the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, said at the news conference. The new rules come one day after a divided House of Representatives voted to approve legislation that would criminalize gender transition treatments for minors and would subject providers to up to 10 years in federal prison. And on Thursday, the House passed a second measure that would bar Medicaid payments for gender-related treatments for minors. The two bills have little chance of passing in the Senate, but showed how far the ultra-conservative Republican majority was willing to go to deliver on President Trump's campaign promise to end such medical treatment. But the proposed rules go much farther by trying to force hospitals nationwide to stop providing the treatments altogether. A 60-day public comment period will follow, and the rules will most likely be subject to legal challenges before going into effect. If finalized, the rules would be a death sentence. Hospitals have such razor-thin margins as it is, said Caroline Farrell, a former CMS lawyer and now an attorney with the firm Foley Hoag. The proposed rules mean just forcing them to stop the care, she said. Gender-related treatments for minors, which can include puberty-blocking drugs, hormone therapies, and in rarer cases, surgeries, have been subject to fierce debate worldwide, but are endorsed by most medical groups in the United States. Mr. Kennedy called out the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics at Thursday's news conference, saying that by endorsing treatments for minors, they had violated their oath to do no harm. This is not medicine, it is malpractice, he said. The AAP condemned the new rules as a dangerous intrusion of the federal government into private medical decisions. Allowing the government to determine which patient groups deserve care sets a dangerous precedent, and children and families will bear the consequences, Dr. Susan Cressley, president of the AAP, said. The announcement on Thursday also included other actions. Another CMS rule would prevent Medicaid from paying for the treatments for minors, and the Food and Drug Administration announced that it was issuing warning letters to 12 manufacturers of breast binders, tight garments that used to flatten and masculinize chest appearance under clothing, for illegal marketing of the products to children as a treatment for gender dysphoria. Kelly Robinson, president of the Human Rights Campaign, said these rules are proposals, not binding law. She added community members, healthcare providers, administrators, and our allies should be vocal in pushing back by sharing the ways these proposals would be devastating to their families and the healthcare community at large. Thursday's announcement follows the clear roadmap set out by Mr. Trump in executive orders issued in his first days in office that denied the very existence of transgender people. It is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female, the president wrote. The executive orders also demanded that the Department of Health and Human Services produce a report reviewing the evidence for such treatments. A final version of that report, which was written by several vocal critics of the medical treatments on both sides of the political aisle, was released in November. The report concluded that while the benefits of medical interventions were uncertain, the risks, which can include loss of fertility, were more known. Instead, it prioritized the role of psychotherapy, an intervention that is also supported by little evidence, but that the authors argued had fewer risks. The Health Department report formed the centerpiece of the new rules on Thursday. Mr. Kennedy cited its conclusions to argue that the treatments do not meet professionally recognized standards for medical care, and that hospitals providing such treatments will therefore be considered to be violating the conditions of participation for hospitals to receive federal funding. That conclusion is unprecedented, Ms. Farrell said. In another arena, abortion, a statute called the Hyde Amendment, passed by Congress in 1976, stipulates that hospitals may not use federal funds to pay for abortions for patients, except in rare cases. But the proposed rules, which do not stem from legislation, go even further, issuing an existential threat to hospitals that accept any federal funding, even if that money is not used to pay for the treatments themselves. Questions over evidence to support medical interventions for minors have been central to debate worldwide as demand for the treatments has increased. An influential report released in Britain last year found that the scientific evidence on the benefits and risks of the treatment was remarkably weak, and concluded by recommending that puberty blockers be restricted to research trials only. Several European countries, and most recently New Zealand, have imposed restrictions. But none of those countries has taken the approach of the United States, where the treatments are now banned in nearly half the country, and in some cases criminal charges are threatened against doctors providing them. The new rules add to that by trying to bar any hospital from prescribing the medications. Since Mr. Trump took office, several high-profile pediatric gender clinics in blue states have stopped providing puberty blockers and hormone therapies for gender transition, including Children's Hospital Los Angeles in California, University of Michigan Health in Michigan, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center in Pennsylvania, Fenway Health in Massachusetts, and Yale New Haven Hospital in Connecticut. Children's Hospital Los Angeles notified staff members in June that their clinic would shutter in late July. In an email announcing its closure, hospital leadership told employees that the potential termination of federal funds, which account for 65% of its annual funding and enable it to be the largest pediatric safety net provider in California, would be an existential threat to our hospital operations. Parents of trans youth have been on alert for months as the Trump administration applied other forms of leverage to providers of gender transition care. Some have sought out backup providers, including telehealth providers, who take only private insurance. Some trans teens have been rationing out their medication to last as long as possible in the event of an abrupt cutoff. State bans on the treatments have proliferated since 2021, when Arkansas became the first state to pass a law barring doctors from prescribing puberty blockers or hormones or performing surgeries on transgender minors. In June, the Supreme Court ruled that, given the continuing medical debates about provision of gender-related care, states should be able to decide whether and how to provide the treatments to minors. Writing for the majority in upholding Tennessee's ban on the treatments, Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr. cited the fierce scientific and policy debates about the safety, efficacy, and propriety of medical treatments in an evolving field, and said the questions should be resolved by the people, their elected representatives, and the democratic process. But new rules would effectively override that decision by forcing blue states to comply with federal orders, said Josh Block of the American Civil Liberties Union. The court's rationale was to defer to democracy and let different states make different decisions, Mr. Block said, referring to a case challenging Tennessee's law, United States versus Scarametti. This attempt to unilaterally impose a nationwide ban by executive fiat without any actual legislation authorizing it undermines the entire rationale for upholding the law in Scarametti in the first place. The ACLU, which served as co-counsel on the Scarametti case, said on Thursday that it planned to challenge the new rules in court. But advocates said the federal funding rule targets the providers at academic centers who are best positioned to both assess the health needs of trans young people and advance research in the field of pediatric gender care. Kellen Baker, a senior advisor for health policy at the Movement Advancement Project, an LGBTQ advocacy organization, estimated that there were about 36 hospitals and community health centers with the resources and interdisciplinary expertise to optimally provide this care, while conducting research that moves the science forward. All of them rely on Medicaid and Medicare as a critical source of revenue. This year, the Department of Justice issued subpoenas to doctors and hospitals demanding confidential records of the patients they have treated, and announced that manufacturers of drugs used in the patient's care were under investigation for possible violations of drug marketing laws. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has called on the public to report hospitals and doctors who are performing mastectomies on minors, and the Federal Trade Commission held a day-long hearing devoted to the question of whether providers of transgender medical treatments are engaging in unfair or deceptive trade practices. States, led by Democrats, have challenged the Justice Department directives in an ongoing case, and several providers have successfully moved to quash the subpoenas. One group of patients in Pennsylvania and another in Connecticut have filed complaints against providers who have ended their care under state anti-discrimination laws. Several attorneys general in blue states, including Letitia James in New York, have issued guidance reminding providers of their state-level obligations not to back away from providing care. A lot of hospitals are in a tough place, being squeezed between state and federal regulators, said Katie Keith, director of the Health Policy and Law Initiative at Georgetown University Law Center. Timothy Jost, an emeritus law professor at Washington and Lee University, an expert on Medicaid and Medicare, said that legal challenges would most likely hinge on the first provision in the Medicare statute, which states that the federal government shall not interfere with the practice of medicine. The health secretary's authority to create rules around the participation of hospitals in Medicare and Medicaid, he said, is based on his authority under the Social Security Act to ensure patient health and safety. During the public comment period, they're going to receive lots and lots of comments on either side of it, Mr. Jost said. Ultimately, he said, the decision over whether the new rules were ensuring the health and safety of patients would be left up to the courts. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Pope Leo names Illinois bishop to replace Cardinal Dolan in New York. The appointment of Bishop Ronald A. Hicks is expected to bring a markedly different leadership style to New York's archdiocese, by Elizabeth Diaz and Maya King. Pope Leo XIV on Thursday named an Illinois bishop to replace the powerful conservative Cardinal Timothy Dolan as leader of New York's Roman Catholic Archdiocese, a selection that signals his embrace of a more mild and unifying style after the political upheaval of Pope Francis's papacy, while preserving the spirit of the late Pope's reforms. The naming of Bishop Ronald A. Hicks to be the next Roman Catholic Archbishop of New York is one of the most anticipated decisions of Pope Leo's young papacy, his first major move indicating the direction he wants the Church to take in his home country. Bishop Hicks is scheduled to be installed as Archbishop on February 6th at St. Patrick's Cathedral. The appointment echoes Pope Leo's own ascent earlier this year, the unexpected elevation of a little-known bishop from Chicago with a long-time focus on pastoral work and smooth governance. Soft-spoken and steady, Bishop Hicks, 58, has led the Diocese of Joliet, Illinois, since Pope Francis appointed him in 2020. The bishop has largely avoided outspoken politics, unlike Cardinal Dolan, who has boldly championed conservative causes, appeared often on Fox News, and prayed at both of President Donald Trump's inaugurations. The choice suggests a significant shift in leadership style for New York's Archdiocese, the country's second largest and one of its most influential, serving 2.5 million Catholics across the Bronx, Manhattan, and Staten Island, and several areas north of the city, according to statistics provided by the Archdiocese. The selection also comes at a pivotal moment in the city's political and religious life. From his start early in the Obama era, Cardinal Dolan has called for Catholic leaders to become more politically involved amid national debates about abortion and same-sex marriage. He became a favorite of center-right Catholics, particularly after he fought the Obama administration's rule requiring some religious groups to provide contraception for employees. Recently, he described the assassinated conservative activist Charlie Kirk as a modern-day St. Paul. Cardinal Dolan turned 75 in February, the age when bishops formally submit their resignations to the Pope for him to accept or ignore. But Pope Francis's death and the following papal transition put many such major ecclesial changes on hold, leaving them for the new pontiff. Bishop Hicks has advanced under the leadership of more progressive church leaders, including Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago, an ally of Pope Francis, who has prioritized immigrants and a welcoming stance toward LGBTQ people. In Chicago, before going to Joliet, Bishop Hicks served as an auxiliary bishop. But in the Diocese of Joliet, he has found support from conservative priests and parishioners who observe the traditional Latin Mass, an old form of worship that Pope Francis attempted to discourage. Before his election, Pope Leo led an influential Vatican post that selects and manages bishops globally. On a smaller scale, Bishop Hicks currently chairs the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops committee responsible for clergy and vocations, a position that helps bishops and priests navigate pastoral needs. In June, Bishop Hicks helped organize a seminar at the University of Notre Dame to help newer bishops learn how to govern a diocese, with sessions on decision-making, oversight, and communications. His pastoral messages, in English and in Spanish, have stressed the value of unity and the importance of peacemaking across divides and of listening to one another with respect. I've been told that I have a gentle spirit, yet I'm able to also be strong and to try to set vision and agendas, Bishop Hicks once told a Catholic diocesan publication. The high-profile nature of the position is a drastic change from the Diocese of Joliet. With about 520,000 Catholics, it is just a quarter of the size of the Archdiocese of New York. Being elevated from a small diocese to a major seat is fairly rare, especially after a relatively short tenure of about 5 years. The Archbishop of New York is historically also elevated to become a cardinal, the Church's top clerical position below the Pope. The change in leadership also comes as the Church is speaking out vocally in support of immigrants under deportation threat. At a news conference at St. Patrick's Cathedral on Thursday morning, Bishop Hicks said he was proud of the Catholic bishop's recent statement rebuking the Trump administration's deportation campaign. The United States, he said, should be a country that upholds human dignity, respect, teaching each other well, and making sure that anything connected to these policies are connected to due process. New York, which is home to one of the nation's largest immigrant populations, has contended with a marked increase in immigration enforcement activity, and parts of the city have been scouted as possible detention centers. Though houses of worship have long been considered off-limits for immigration enforcement, clergy have been under outsized pressure to protect their congregations. Catholic leaders have been particularly critical of the Trump administration's crackdowns. Zohran Mamdani, who will be the city's first Muslim mayor on January 1st, met with Cardinal Dolan this fall, shortly before the November mayoral election. Cardinal Dolan, who was appointed to lead the Archdiocese of New York by Pope Benedict XVI in 2009, has held the position through some of the city's most tumultuous years. The cardinal has wielded particular influence over the Church's real estate holdings and archdiocesan schools, in part to help fund the Church's legal defense against sexual assault claims. He was made a cardinal in 2012. Last week, Cardinal Dolan said the Archdiocese would raise at least $300 million to settle claims brought forth by more than 1,300 people who said they were sexually assaulted by priests and lay staff members. To raise the funds, The Archdiocese has weighed selling some of its real estate holdings, including its First Avenue headquarters in Manhattan, which sold for more than $100 million last year. Both Bishop Hicks and Pope Leo grew up in Chicago's south suburbs. The bishop at 155th and Woodlawn, and the Pope 7 minutes drive north at 141st and Indiana. They each spent years in Latin America as missionaries. But they did not meet until last year when Cardinal Robert F. Prevost spoke at an Illinois parish before he became Pope Leo, Bishop Hicks later told a local television station. They celebrated Mass together at an event with the Midwest Augustinians, the Pope's home order. As a priest in El Salvador, Bishop Hicks led Nuestros Pequeños Hermanos, an organization that cares for orphan children in 9 Latin American countries. His favorite saint is Archbishop Oscar Arnulfo Romero, the Salvadorian who championed the poor and was assassinated as he said Mass in 1980. On Christmas Day 3 years ago, Bishop Hicks visited inmates at the Joliet Treatment Center. Last month, he returned and baptized 4. This understated leadership style reflects Pope Leo's own sensibilities. I recently, as the shepherd of the entire diocese, have to take a number of voices and perspectives and opinions all into context, Bishop Hicks said in a video for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops last year. The way to remedy that is surround myself with some really good people and try to collaborate and get the best advice and never make decisions just on my own. But unlike Pope Leo, Bishop Hicks roots for the Chicago Cubs, not the White Sox. The DNC is scrapping its report on what went wrong in 2024. Ken Martin, the Democratic National Committee chairman, ordered the autopsy months ago, but is now said to believe that its release would be counterproductive for the party. By Shane Goldmacher. The Democratic National Committee is killing its autopsy of the 2024 election. Ken Martin, the chairman of the DNC, said on Thursday that he had decided not to publish a report that he ordered months ago into what went wrong for the Democratic Party last year. Party officials have conducted more than 300 interviews with Democrats in all 50 states to create a document that Mr. Martin had once pitched as crucial to charting a path forward. Mr. Martin will instead keep the findings under seal. He believes that looking back so publicly and painfully at the past would prove counterproductive for the party as it tries next year to take back power in Congress, according to a DNC spokeswoman who spoke on the condition of anonymity to share the thinking behind his decision. "Here's our North Star. Does this help us win?" Mr. Martin said in a statement. "If the answer is no, it's a distraction from the core mission." Many Democrats want to move on from 2024 and keep the focus on President Trump. They began the year demoralized, but now feel emboldened after the party's series of victories in November and strong showings in special elections this year. Still, even if it is good politics to stuff the report in a filing cabinet, Democrats may well be avoiding self-examination and a chance for introspection. It's reflective of a broader problem within the party, which is we are scared of ever making anybody in our coalition upset, said Simon Bazelon, a Democratic researcher who was the lead author of a different autopsy called Deciding to Win that was released by Welcome PAC, a centrist group. "I understand the incentives involved here, but it also limits us in a lot of ways because it means we can't address difficult questions head on." Others cheered the shelving of a document that was likely to divide the party's coalition. "Haven't we rehashed 2024 enough?" said Daniel Wessel, a former communications advisor to the DNC. "We just won a bunch of elections this year. There is also a lot of good to be learned from there." The party's brand still appears deeply damaged in the eyes of many voters. A national poll from Quinnipiac University this week found that only 18% of voters approved of how Democrats in Congress were doing their jobs, a record low. Since the day of his election in February, Mr. Martin has promised an audit of 2024's mistakes and a roadmap for the future. He was adamant that it not be called an autopsy because he said the party was not dead. He preferred the more anodyne label after action review. No matter the title, the report's existence has proved contentious. Those initially briefed on the planned document over the summer had said it would skirt past the question of whether former President Joseph R. Biden Jr. should have run for re-election, as well as key decisions from the campaign of former Vice President Kamala Harris. There has been subsequent tussling behind the scenes about both the audit's scope and who should take the brunt of the blame for Ms. Harris's loss. Some senior Harris officials declined to be interviewed. The DNC had warned over the summer that any analysis of its report was premature. Folks might be better off holding their applause or their criticism until we have a chance to complete our work and people can actually read it, Paul Rivera, a confidant of Mr. Martin's, who had taken the lead in researching and preparing the report, said at the time. Now those people will never get the chance. Rising dissatisfaction with Mr. Trump and the economy could be a recipe for Democratic success in 2026, even if voters continue to have misgivings about the party. In the Quinnipiac poll that showed record low approval of congressional Democrats, voters said by 4 percentage points that they would prefer Democratic control of Congress to a Republican majority. At a gathering of the Democratic National Committee last week in Los Angeles, party officials were more bullish than they had been in months about their chances. Mr. Martin punctuated the party's looming affordability message. Things, he said, using an expletive, are too expensive. Mr. Martin appears determined not to step on any political momentum. Many political insiders who questioned why the party had commissioned an autopsy in the first place are expected to greet the report's demise with glee. In our conversations with stakeholders from across the Democratic ecosystem, we are aligned on what's important, and that's learning from the past and winning the future, Mr. Martin said in his statement. The DNC's finances remain precarious. Mr. Martin's candidacy for chairman was opposed by some major donors, and this fall he took out a $15 million loan to keep the party fully funded. After the loan, the party entered November with just $18.3 million in cash on hand, meaning it had only about $3 million after accounting for the debts. The Republican National Committee, by contrast, has $91.2 million and no debts. DNC officials provided a summary of some of the report's findings. The prescriptions were more tactical than strategic. For example, the audit found that so-called peer-to-peer text messaging had not actually generated meaningful conversations or moved the needle in persuading voters. The research also found that the party had been too focused on the overall numbers of doors knocked on and calls made rather than on quality interactions. In 2024, Trump campaign officials had mocked the statistics that the Harris team was releasing and argued that the Republican operation was more narrowly and effectively targeting its outreach to lower propensity voters. Other findings include that Democrats did not spend sufficiently on streaming services to reach younger voters, whom it described as a new swing coalition, and that the party's data infrastructure showed signs of strain. The unreleased report also said, according to the officials, that the party had operated from a defensive posture on issues like public safety and immigration, while ceding ground on the economy to Republicans. Some Democratic donors have demanded a more thorough accounting of how exactly the party and Ms. Harris spent $1.5 billion in 15 weeks en route to losing every battleground state in 2024. Since the election, it has come out that a former top aide to Mr. Biden, Mike Donilon, received $4 million from the campaign, even though he did not work meaningfully with the Harris campaign after Mr. Biden left the ticket. I read about that, Ms. Harris said of Mr. Donilon's compensation in an interview last month with the New York Times. That was before I got there. Ms. Harris took responsibility for the spending that occurred after she became the nominee. "The buck stops with me," she said. "There are a lot of expenses associated with running for president of the United States, especially a new candidate with 3.5 months to go." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. U.S. military announces 4 killed in 26th boat strike. The attack on Wednesday brings the total number killed to at least 99 since the Trump administration began bombing boats suspected of ferrying drugs in the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean. By Adam Sella. The U.S. military announced on Wednesday that it had struck a boat earlier in the day that it suspected of ferrying drugs in the eastern Pacific, killing 4 people. In a post on social media, U.S. Southern Command said that the strike, conducted at the direction of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, had targeted a boat sailing along a known narco-trafficking route, and that 4 male narco-terrorists had been killed in the attack. The New York Times could not independently verify the strike or the intelligence cited by the military. The strike, the 26th announced by the U.S. military, brings the total number killed to at least 99 since the Trump administration began bombing boats in September. The attacks have drawn the ire of legal experts and many members of Congress who contend that the strikes amount to extrajudicial killings and potentially war crimes. The boat strike on Wednesday is the latest in a ratcheting escalation between the United States and Venezuela. The United States has amassed thousands of troops and dozens of warships in the Caribbean Sea. In recent days, it announced a blockade aimed at Venezuela's oil industry, and Venezuela ordered its navy to escort oil tankers coming from its ports. In Congress earlier on Wednesday, the House rejected a Democratic-led measure that would have tried to rein in the Trump administration's campaign against boats suspected of carrying drugs. Europe to lend $105 billion to Ukraine without touching Russian funds. European Union officials wanted to use Russia's frozen assets to back a major loan to Ukraine. Facing opposition in their own camp, they settled on another way. By Gina Smialek. European leaders agreed early on Friday morning to keep Ukraine funded for 2 years with a loan of 90 billion euros, or about $105 billion, though they failed to agree on their first choice option of using Russian state assets frozen on the continent as backing for the loan. That ambitious frozen asset plan was killed at the 11th hour as European heads of state and government met in Brussels, a show of division that risked making the European Union appear indecisive at a key moment. Instead, European leaders announced that they will funnel money to Ukraine with a loan backed by the EU budget. Because the plan does not leverage the large stash of Russian savings immobilized in Europe, it is likely to cost more and could prove more difficult to quickly scale up than the original idea. But because it will still get needed cash to Kyiv, officials celebrated it as a win. This will address the urgent financial needs of Ukraine, Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council, said at an early morning news conference in Brussels. He added that the European Union would reserve its option to eventually use Russia's immobilized assets. European nations took action last week to freeze those savings indefinitely. The funding plan comes at a crucial moment as Ukraine negotiates potential peace terms with the United States, and timing was important, with Ukraine expected to begin running out of money early in 2026. European officials had painted the funding as an opportunity to show that they are powerful actors on the global stage and strong partners for President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, who welcomed the decision in a social media post on Friday. "This is significant support that truly strengthens our resilience," he wrote on X. "It is important that Russian assets remain immobilized and that Ukraine has received a financial security guarantee for the coming years." For months, European leaders had hoped to overcome Belgian concerns to clinch a deal on using the 210 billion euros of frozen Russian assets held in Europe to back the massive loan to Ukraine. The setup was supposed to fund much of Ukraine's governing and war expenses in 2026 and 27. But the idea of such a loan was always risky. Russia is already taking legal action over what it paints as the unlawful seizure of its assets. After weeks of back and forth, Belgium, where most of the assets frozen in Europe are held, remained unconvinced, headed into Thursday's meeting, worried that it could be on the hook for Russian retaliation. The guarantees that Belgium demanded to protect against that threat, however, proved too much for some other European countries to quickly accept. Europeans want a voice in determining how to end the biggest war on their continent in 80 years and secure peace afterward. But President Trump and the Kremlin have frequently left Europe out of discussions over Ukraine's future. In fact, the Trump administration has recently made it clear how negatively it views the European Union. The administration warned in a national security strategy that Europe faces civilizational erasure, charging that the bloc and other transnational bodies undermine political liberty and national sovereignty, allow uncontrolled immigration, and place the continent on a path that will leave it unrecognizable in 20 years or less. The weeks spent wrangling over the frozen asset plan that ultimately failed may suggest to the world that the European Union's clunky structure and diverse voices remain barriers to rapid action, even at urgent moments. The collapse of the frozen asset loan plan was a political stumble for both Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, and Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, the bloc's executive arm. Both had championed it. Still, leaders argued that the agreed-upon alternative would serve its purpose. They emphasized that Ukraine will still not be asked to pay back the loan unless Russia pays reparations. This is a decisive message for an end to the war, Mr. Merz said in a statement. Putin will only make concessions once he realizes his war will not pay off. Lemon-shaped world is the most stretched-out planet ever seen. An unusual object orbiting a rapidly spinning star might be a new phenomenon in the universe. By Jonathan O'Callaghan. Earth isn't a perfect sphere. The rotation of our planet causes it to bulge ever so slightly at the equator, making it about 0.3% wider there than from pole to pole. But that's nothing compared with PSR J23222650b, an object the mass of Jupiter studied recently by the James Webb Space Telescope. This planet's equatorial diameter is about 38% wider than its polar diameter, giving the world the odd appearance of a lemon and a very strange atmosphere. It's the stretchiest planet that we've confirmed the stretchiness of, said Michael Zhang, an exoplanet scientist at the University of Chicago and the lead author of a paper describing the planet published Tuesday in the Astrophysical Journal Letters. PSR J23222650b was discovered in 2011 by the Parkes Radio Telescope in Australia. It is more than 2,000 light-years from Earth. The world was immediately interesting for being a Jupiter-sized gas giant that orbits a pulsar, a dense and rapidly spinning star left over after a supernova. Pulsars are so named because they shoot out jets of radiation from their poles. The planet is only 1 million miles from the star, completing an orbit in about 8 hours. It is the only gas giant known to be orbiting a pulsar. This proximity gives the planet its unusual shape as the star's gravity pulls on it. It's close enough that things are actually being funneled from the object to the pulsar, said Peter Gao, an exoplanet scientist at the Carnegie Institution for Science in Washington, D.C., and an author of the paper. You have a literal tip, like a point, where material actually comes out of the planet and spirals in. Using the Webb telescope's infrared capabilities, the team was able to study the atmosphere of the planet, the first time this has been done for a planet orbiting a pulsar. Those observations hinted at the world's odd shape, and they also revealed something extremely bizarre. The planet is devoid of hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, elements common on other planets, including gas giants. Instead, it is made mostly of helium and molecular carbon. A helium and carbon-dominated world is something we've never seen before, Dr. Gao said. Its carbon atmosphere might give it clouds made out of graphite, Dr. Zhang said, and diamonds at its core. Bands of storms would trace the world's lemon-like exterior in the shape of a W, while it most likely has a red color because of dust and soot-like particles formed by the carbon. "It's a wacky, weird thing," said Emily Rauscher, a theoretical astrophysicist at the University of Michigan who was not involved in the paper. "It's not formed in a way like any normal planet." PSR J23222650b's strange properties might mean it is not actually a planet at all, but instead the remnant of a star that once orbited the pulsar and has slowly been eaten away. "We favor the star scenario," said Dr. Gao, possibly making this a type of system known as a black widow pulsar, where we see a star being eaten by a pulsar. This might be the very last moments of such a system, with PSR J23222650b on the cusp of being entirely consumed. It would have lost 99.9% of its mass, and we just happened to catch it right at the very end, Dr. Gao said. Alternatively, Dr. Zhang said it could also be an entirely new type of object that we don't have a name for, with PSR J23222650b staying in a stable orbit around its pulsar for billions of years, rather than being imminently eaten. He hopes to look for more such worlds in future to find out. "I hope we have a sibling to compare this object to," he said. "If it's continuously losing mass, we had to be really lucky to see it in its last breath before it disappears." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Friday, December 19th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chris Wilhelm. Thank you for listening.